So, I'll be completely honest with you. This was an interesting question to be asked of me because I don't have that much I can talk about this race without spoiling some things that the party hasn't encountered yet. But I do want to kind of give an overall, this is what we know so far about the Scions, sometimes referred to as the Ancients. The vast majority of people in the setting still refer to them as the Ancients. It is actually considered uncommon to the point where it should be noteworthy anytime any given individual actually knows they were called the Scions. Now, the term Scion, nobody's 100% certain where that term came from. It is mentioned that the Scions themselves are an unusual race. For example, they have the ability to have what's basically perfect communication. I've tried to describe this before and I've kind of failed at it, so I'm going to do my best here to really get across the point. Because this really informs all other aspects of psionic society right here. Scions communicate everything all the time with 100% truthfulness. They do that through their mental connection. It's not a hive mind. It's more like the only way their mental speaking is something that just immediately flashes. Like, for example, if let me use a weird example. Let's say you're walking along with a friend of yours down the street and you notice a car's running the light and it's going to come run and hit you. Now, in real life, your options are try to say something, which will probably take too long, or literally just grab the person and yank them back out of the way, because you can't communicate quickly enough. A Scion could immediately communicate the car, its destination, its speed, the color of the car, the person who's in the car, the direction it's coming from, the fact that it's probably going to hit you, the fact that you're concerned about it hitting you, the weather, the temperature, every single bit of information that is in you glancing over there, the thousands and thousands of different details that your mind instantaneously processes when you glance over and notice that car coming. All of that is conveyed immediately and instantaneously to the person you communicate it towards. Now, pardon me, still snuffling a bit. You might say, well, that's pretty awesome, actually. It does come with some detriments. Now, see, here's one interesting thing not everyone is fully aware of, but I don't feel like this is a big spoiler to share. A Scion must do that deliberately. They're not constantly broadcasting all their thoughts all the time. However, due to the nature of psionic society, most Scions unintentionally constantly broadcast their thoughts all the time. This led to two unique phenomenons. The first is the fact that the Psionic Empire rose in an extremely small period of time. We're talking less than 2 decades. I forget the exact time off the top of my head right now, and I couldn't find my notes saying it, but off the top of my head, I want to say it's 15 years. It took the Scions 15 years to conquer the entire planet. That's more than one continent in their case. Their home continent of Aburian and the continent of Darra, both completely subjugated and building this massive sprawling empire starting from nothing in 15 years. Now that may sound insane, but keep in mind one of the most important aspects of technological advancement is communication. I have said many, many times that it is my belief that the Gutenberg printing press, specifically, because I don't want to talk about the previous ones, the printing press is really the apex crux point of human technological advancement. That at that point on, anyone who had an idea could have it printed down and shared, and that increased the spread of communication, which increased the spread of ideas, which increased the rate of technological growth. So that instead of doing this thing, it was just pretty much skyrocketing up and has never stopped ever since. Now imagine if humankind has the ability to communicate instantly and perfectly with everyone all the time, just like that. Perfect communication. Just how quickly do you think that society would be able to advance technologically and in this case magically as well? The Scions invented huge, incredibly advanced forms of technology and magic technology, although the Scions only dabbled a little bit in technology. They were very heavily reliant upon weaving in particular, since due to the nature of weaving, well, let's just say that all Scions have a bonus to weaving, and we'll leave it at that for now. But so weaving came very naturally to them, and anytime any new Scion had an idea regarding to how to apply weaving better, within literally minutes, it was disseminated across the entire psionic culture because it would spread. It wouldn't just be one guy saying, you know, it'd be cool. It'd be one guy saying, you know, it'd be cool. And then all his friends instantly know about this. And all their friends, and all their friends. So you could see how this information flow of consciousness kind of developed and shaped and carved psionic society. Their society was unusual to live in. I find it very difficult to describe because it's actually quite alien. It's probably one of the more alien cultures I've ever developed throughout the course of my fictional career. And I know that sounds weird because they're fairly humanoid-looking creatures who mostly look like humans. But the way that they function was so different than the way we do. They had a sort of class system, but that class system was solely dependent on skill base. In other words, what you're good at becomes your class. What I really should apply this a little more to like a Final Fantasy Tactics or Final Fantasy V kind of a class system, as opposed to a more traditional, you are born a blacksmith, therefore you're a blacksmith kind of a system. The people who became skilled at blacksmithing were the ones who became blacksmiths. Now I know what you're thinking. Well, hang on. If they could share all ideas constantly, why isn't everyone skilled at everything? There's actually a reason for that, but it boils down to the fact that knowledge is not enough. Having the book knowledge is different than having the experience and skill and will to apply it. You may have all the knowledge of chemistry, all of it, just all of chemistry locked in your brain, but that does not automatically make you a brilliant chemist. You may not even have an interest in chemistry, regardless of whether you have that information in you or not, thereby affecting the drive side of things. So it's only the stuff that you're actually interested in that you push. Now, as kind of a natural byproduct, any given scion who had an interest in something, whether it be smithing or weaving or sailing or crafting or fighting or magic or whatever, writing, literature, any given scion who would do that because of the natural information spread would have access to, imagine having access to the entire internet always. And anytime anything new is added to the internet, you have access to it. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, I do. No. You don't. What I mean by that is it's in your head. The moment someone adds a new blog post in insert country that's the opposite part of the world from you, you now have that blog post in your head. Just within minutes, you have that information. Anytime anyone came up with a new technique or a new idea or a new concept, boom, it was just spread out amongst the masses. So if you could picture, I know this is going to be a weird analogy, but if you could picture that the psionic culture is a lake, okay? And every single one of this lake, at every point in the lake, every molecule of water here is constantly exploding into a geyser. And that's spreading the water throughout the rest of the lake. But it's not fluid. It's not just going over like this, because the moment it goes up, it encounters the other 500 or so geysers that are also exploding at the exact same time. It made for a constant information overload. So Scions sort of learned to acclimate to each other for this. I actually described this in brief during one of the party's excursions in there, but to make this absolutely clear, psionic culture also had a downside of this. Every time someone had a new idea or someone was different or someone thought in a different way, within a very short period of time, they would become acclimated to everyone else's way of thinking, and they wouldn't even realize it. It kind of was an accelerated, I know I've talked about this so much lately, it was kind of an accelerated form of cultural stagnation, because everyone was always constantly graying out amongst each other. And, yeah, I don't know what else to add to that. Furthermore, though, in furtherance to this, so I kind of spoke in an exaggerative before. It's not every scion is reverberating to every other scion. There are exceptions. And this happened many times over the 15 years because distance is an obstacle to the psionic telepathy. The fact that you can communicate within a certain range. So if there's a group of scions who live way over here in the boonies, they're constantly communicating with each other, but not with the people who are several miles down the road, right? However, as you might imagine, that problem sort of basically what would happen is every so often a scion would, for whatever reason, travel from one of their, let's call it information hubs, to one of the other information hubs, from one town to a fortress or to a research facility or wherever. And they already have all the knowledge from their hub in their head. It's already been bouncing around there. So the moment they get within range of the new hub, now all that new information is going to them, and all their new information is going to them. So I was being a little bit exaggerated with the minutes thing, because it's more within a localized region. Otherwise, their entire society would have collapsed in a lot shorter period of time than the 28 or so years that it took. Oh, speaking of which, so they accelerated and advanced and conquered the world in 15 years. The Scions were basically wiped out within 28 years. I don't mean 15 plus 28. I mean 28 years was the amount of time the Scions spent on this planet, in general, and especially as a dominant force. They walked in, took over, and then vanished. Now, the party still has not learned what happened to the Scions, but they have a strong theory. They believe that the Scions became the Darra. Now, I've actually already talked about this. This is true, but this is not true in whole. This is not true in totality, because only some of the Scions became the Darra, and the party learned about the rivalry between the four emperors, which I'll talk a little bit more in a bit, and that led to two of the emperors, the Lady Airfall and the Lord Rytherin, basically taking their own group of loyal followers and saying, no, we're going over here. And they formed the Darra. The Lady Airfall having been so incredibly skilled with regards to inventing and designing, she basically created a new form of their existence and rewove their souls. So they are in most ways a new species, even though all Darra were once Scions, because both Darra and Scions share one trait in the fact that they cannot breed, they cannot procreate. Now, they literally quite functionally do not have the equipment for it. This is as good a time as any to talk about one of the major reasons for the downfall of the Scions. But I'm not going to, because I want to rewind a little bit. So I described that a bit. All Scions have sort of luminescent, almost fish scaly skin, but much, much less obvious. Basically, if you're looking at a Scion, unless you're catching the light just right, they'll look like a perfectly normal human. But if you happen to catch a reflection of the light, you'll see basically under their skin, just kind of layered there, are these flecks of luminescent, reflective, like, I don't know what else to call it, fish scale kind of a thing, like the inside of a seashell, almost, if you will. Those scales can vary in style and color of the light that they reflect, but otherwise that is basically the appearance of all Scions. The only known exception to that was Gerlin, but I kind of want to save talking about him more later. I mentioned that, though, because something that I'm not sure anyone caught on to was the fact that every time they had ever seen Gerlin, all of it, both the statue and the descriptions, and literally they actually spied on him once, he looked like a Scion. Actually, they spied on him twice, now that I'm thinking about it. So every time he looked like a Scion, but when they encountered him in person, there was a tremendous, violent amount of spatial energy, of the element of space, running through his skin to the point where he basically didn't look like he had skin at all. You could see his eyes, you could see, his hair and whatnot, and his massive beard, but you could not actually see skin. It was just this constant flowing spatial energy. That's a mystery that has yet to have been fully solved, but I don't mind sharing some of the speculation. The biggest and most obvious speculation is the fact that all Scions look like that, and they just use their abilities in order to present a illusion to everyone else. Since they're not actually casting magic at you or doing a spell or whatever, they're literally making you think you're seeing something else. See, that's another little aspect of Scions. In addition to their communication with each other, they have the ability to mind control other races, and the exact makeup of that other race determines how resistant they are to this. There are two races that are very unresistant to this. In fact, they are the weakest to the psionic mind control: humans and Tuskers. Both of these races became very common slaves amongst the mass of the psionic society, to the point where they were almost omnipresent. You would see them almost everywhere. Another common race you would see as a psionic slave, if you were actually out and about during the Psionic Empire's time, would be a Tumarok. And the final race you would see would be a Lugian. All four of these races were very, very commonplace in everyday society amongst Scions. You would see them everywhere. Now, to explain a little bit about that whole enslavement thing, I have to talk about the superiority thing. I feel like I've failed at describing this properly in the past, so I'm going to do my best here. If you ever hear someone just say, oh, well, PC gaming's superior, you know what I mean when I talk about fake arrogance. In other words, most people who adopt that stance are doing it to provoke a response, or because they're covering up for their own inadequacy, or because they have insecurities on the matter, or because they think it's what they should say, or because they think it's funny. In other words, a dozen or so reasons that don't actually involve them legitimately thinking that. This is true in real life history. I don't want to get too much into hot button topics, but a lot of people in real life history that I've seen personally who say something like, fags are terrible, or blacks are terrible, or whatever other garbage they're trying to spew, they don't mean it literally, and you could tell by the way they say it. They're just saying it to provoke a reaction, or because, blah, 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 blah. There's all those stupid reasons, but they don't literally mean that. There's a difference when someone legitimately believes they are superior, legitimately has true arrogance, because someone who is truly arrogant won't proclaim it. Someone who is truly believing that they are superior won't tout it from the mountaintops. They don't need to. They are superior in their mind. Okay? Do you understand the difference between these two things? I mention this because the Scions are the latter. To a Scion, it was natural that they are the superior race. The Darra share the same philosophy. It's just logical that the Scions are better, because they are, again, from their own perspective, because they just are. They have no lifespan. They don't breed, but who gives a damn? They don't need to procreate to continue as a species. They can instantly communicate everything forever. They can mind control every other race into total subservitude. I mention this because some Scions would treat the lesser races, which is everything that is not Scion, as little better than a plate. And I want to use that analogy specifically because I don't mean they would treat them as if they were pets. You usually care about your pets. No, I'm talking about like a paper plate that you just had dinner on and then you toss into the trash afterwards. There are Scions who would treat lesser races like that. And there are Scions who would treat lesser races as pets. And there are Scions who would treat lesser races as unfortunate children that need to be taken care of. Regardless of their perspective, every single one of these Scions shared the same overall core belief that they are superior. And whether the lesser races are races to be utilized, to be kept around for amusement purposes, or to be, oh, you poor thing, let's take care of you, has varied across history, and the Darra have continued in this vein ever since. Quick aside, by the way, to make this absolutely clear, I know I already talked about the Darra, but the Darra, with extremely few exceptions, do not have the mental abilities of the Scions. It's one of the things they lost when they converted themselves to Darra. They no longer have that instantaneous communication of perfect communication. They no longer have the ability to communicate or mind control to other minds. There are some exceptions to that. I will freely admit that, but they are far and few between. So, this mentality explains everything about psionic society and everything about the way psionic society interacted with the other races. They moved into Darra, conquered it within a matter of months. The whole continent, by the way, everything there, just steamrolled over it. The only race that resisted them at all, and I know you're probably not going to be surprised by this too much, are the Olthoi. Now, the Olthoi were actually very smart. They knew what they were getting into with these Scions. I'm giving away a little bit too much here, but let's just say the Olthoi knew the Scions were coming and knew how to deal with them. So the Olthoi were not completely immune to the psionic mind control, but remember how I mentioned based on a species makeup, they'll be more or less resistant? There's no species that you've encountered thus far in the world that is more resistant to psionic mind manipulation than the Olthoi. But they pretended. They knew that there would be actual conflict if they didn't, so they capitulated. They said, oh yes, masters. And they pretended as if they were mind-controlled, when they were not. This is ironic because this then meant that the Scions would never try to exert mind control. I mean, why would you try to enslave a race that is already enslaved, right? It doesn't make sense. And this was an interesting form of subversion. And it allowed the Olthoi to basically act as the closest thing to a resistance against the Scions because they helped a fairly large number of people to avoid the paper plate problem that I mentioned before. Furthermore, the Olthoi were actually very in-depth involved with a few other things that I'm not going to talk about right now, but most notably is the creation of the Darra cost. However, the party hasn't even touched the surface of that yet, so I'm not even going to get into that whole thing yet. Now, the Scions, as I mentioned, advanced magically and magitechnologically very, very, very quickly. The Spurka, which is currently an Olthoi airship, which is flying around the continent right now giving relief, that used to be called the Skyclaw. I shouldn't have named it the Skyclaw. The Skyclaw is actually the name of my ship, my ship, across like every game I play that has a ship. But regardless, the Spurka was in fact a psionic airship, one of many, one of dozens upon dozens that are still hidden and buried underneath Darra in various ruins and whatnot that have been lost in the last 3.5 centuries since the Scions vanished. Well, no, I'll talk about that in a moment. Some people believe... So this is where the term the Ancients come from, because of course the species have encountered ruins and remnants of the Scions and their technology, well, and their magic and their magic technology, and have reverse engineered quite a bit of it. The hub itself was actually a psionic invention. The Great Walls that surround the major cities, also a psionic invention. All of this stuff was stuff that was put in place by them to help govern the lesser races, to help them, well, you know what I mean, to help herd the cattle. Let's just say it what it is. It's funny, too, by the way, because several of my players at several points after they have learned, the more they have said, several of my players have said the more that they learn about the Scions, the more they hate them. Now, another thing I want to talk about is the end of the Scions. Now, well, actually, let's save that a little bit. So let's keep that. Let's talk about the 4 emperors and the 4 kings. This is a little bit spoilery, but I've given away enough information about this that I feel confident talking about it in an open manner. What happened was one day, 4 Scions walked out of some capsules and said, what the hell? Those 4 Scions were Rytherin, Airfall, Gerlin, and a 4th individual who is usually referred to as His Eternal Splendor. Now, these 4 Scions, these 4 beings, knew themselves to be called Scions. It was built into them, if you will. And they are much, much stronger than all other Scions, and a little functionally different than other Scions. They have the same mental abilities, to a greater extent, and each one of them has something that they're just better at than the other ones. Rytherin was an incredible warrior. Airfall was a brilliant inventor. Gerlin was a master weaver. And His Eternal Splendor knew the mind like no one else did. These 4 emperors, as they began to be called, are the 4 who awoke the rest of the Scions, because all the other Scions came from capsules too. Every single one of these Scions is the ones that have ever been. As I mentioned, Scions cannot breed. So every time a Scion has been lost or killed, it has been removed forever from everything. From the gene pool, I guess you could say. Of course, that doesn't apply here. The 4 emperors, due to their nature and due to their power, because they were literally stronger than everyone else, obviously became the actual leadership. They formed a pseudo-council amongst each other that actually ruled the overall approach to the other races. Now you might think, well, hang on. A race that can instantly mentally enslave anyone, why would they need a warrior? 2 reasons for that. 1, spoiler, 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 spoiler. And 2, I'll give you something. I'm not just going to say spoiler, spoiler. Just to give you a little bit of a foreshadowing hint. One of the reasons the Scions needed armies was because there were other foes they were fighting. And no, I'm not referring to the Shadows. So, that's the first reason. The second reason is because, as I mentioned, the mind control is not a perfect thing. Unless you, even if you are a human or a Tusker who are vulnerable to mind control, you still have a chance to resist. And as you might imagine, in the months that they were pushing through Darra, there was a lot of resistance to that. Now, they were basically an agrarian society at that point, the Lelugians and the Sclavian, all the other races there. They were basically wandering around with just barely understanding how to work stone and iron, just beginning at the points of technology, and barely understanding magic. But they still fought back, and the Scions weren't really used to that. And remember, Scion life is more important than other life, because they're naturally superior, because they are the superior race. So they didn't really form armies in the traditional sense. They formed airships. They formed fleets. And those airships would swoop in and basically shock and awe and obliterate them. Whole religions probably would have cropped up about the gods coming down from on heaven to lay judgment, if not for the fact that that was all immediately quelched by the mind control and another little incident I'll talk about in a minute. Now, they also really needed those airships to fight the other enemy. I'll go ahead and mention that. Other enemies. Anyways, so the Scions were masters of the world for the about 13 or so years that they were in charge. Towards the end of their reign, they... Well, okay. I'll give you a few questions, things that have not been answered yet, and then I'll start talking about a few last points here about the Scions. And if there's any more questions about the Scions, please feel free to ask down in the comments below. So, first of all, the Scions... we don't know, you don't know, if the Scions are the ones who built the temples or not. The sanctums, all eight, one to each element. Given their massive ability, I mean, they literally could craft an island out of an elemental ley line. Visayan Lacell, Aphis Lacell, Mary Lacell, and Erlinth Lacell are all artificial constructs built out of a ley line. So the idea that they could make the temples is easy. That's not in question. And it certainly seems like their style, given their obvious elemental affinity. So, but we don't actually know for certainty if they actually did build the temples or not. Furthermore, we don't know if they built a lot of the things, actually, that we encountered. It has been rumored many times that a lot of modern technological progress and magical progress has happened as a result of reverse engineering psionic stuff. And that is to an extent true. As I already gave away during the Darra thing, that's not how the modern races discovered airship power, for example, or magitech power in general. That was something that was actively gifted to them. One thing we do know about the Scions is that they really didn't think about the long term at all. If they could burn down a house to get rid of termites, they would. It wouldn't even occur to them to try and do some kind of long-term solution to salvage the house. Why bother? We just get rid of it. Done. Easy answer. There's a few other questions about them, like, for example, what the heck happened to them when everything vanished? Why did the Darra remain when all the other Scions went away? The location of his eternal splendor, why he is still on Oburian, and a few other aspects about their final days are still unanswered. However, we do know quite a bit because both the many parties involved in this campaign have already uncovered a few things. So let's talk about the final days of the Scions. So the four emperors were in disagreement on how to proceed. Basically, some of the emperors felt like the humans were, children who need to be taken care of. Or not humans. I don't know why I said humans. All races were like children that need to be taken care of. Some of the Scions said that they were pets. And this was a disagreement amongst the emperors in particular. And this disagreement grew so severe that they basically started severing ties with one another. And the two who were leading towards the humans should be taken care of side, the Lord Rytheron and the Lady Airfall, recruited the four kings to their side. Now, I haven't really talked about the four kings yet, but that's for a very specific reason, because the party doesn't know anything about these people. They don't know why they were called the Four Kings. They don't know why they were special. They don't know anything about them whatsoever. So I'm not going to spoil this one. This is something the party still needs to figure out. Nevertheless, there is a reason why they're called the Four Kings. They recruited the Four Kings to their side, and they said, here, come help us. We're going to make things different. Right about when this was happening, several brilliant psionic scientists were going through an operation to try and figure out how to create new life, how to procreate. We're still not 100% sure what exactly went wrong. I mean, obviously I know exactly what went wrong, but it's not been revealed on screen exactly what went wrong. But this led to the Shadow War. Now, The shadows have been described several times. I've been deliberately coy about this point, but I'm going to go and reveal something that is a very important plot point. Depending on who is being asked in character, people either refer to them as the shadows or the shadow. Regardless of that, and the nature of their being, and most people still don't really fully understand who or what the shadows or the shadow are, the shadows were winning. I had this wonderful piece I wrote about how an entire army, which was in this case obviously a fleet, sailed off to take care of the shadows. And when they came back, they were happy. Everything was better. And that entire city fell that very same day to the shadow. The shadows swept across Aborian completely unopposed. There are several theories of exactly what they were doing, but the things that we know they are capable of is they are capable of deceiving you into thinking you are someone they know. They are capable of taking the appearance of someone you know. No one's entirely certain what happens to people who are affected by this. For example, the party encountered Raiguna. Now, you probably don't remember him all that well, but he was a mite who was a part of the party a long, long time ago. And at a certain critical juncture, he actually jumped into a well and nexus of magical energy and blah, blah, blah. And he ended up, well, you don't know exactly what happened, but the point being, they saw him on Erlenth Lissel. Except, as was revealed sometime later, he was actually a shadow. So was he always a shadow? Was he consumed by the shadows? Was he assimilated by the shadows? Did the shadows eat him and spit out another copy of him? Did the shadows make a shadow, an echo of him? Nobody actually knows for certain. And I am certainly not going to talk about the shadows now, because any video I do about the shadows would be like 3 minutes long. There are so many mysteries still there, and I've revealed only the tiniest scraps. They are deadly. That's all you really need to know. And if certain things happened, then the setting would end. Primus would be wiped out. No joke. The shadows were spreading like wildfire amongst the Scions, and the two emperors, Airfall and Rytherin, changed their plans a bit. Rather than having their separate little kingdoms that they were going to make in order to, go their own path, they decided to completely seal these off from the outside world in such an absolute way that they felt that the shadows would never find them there. Shortly thereafter, and I mean within literally minutes of having fully established these 4 sanctums on the 4 artificial islands, something happened. The party has dubbed this the Cataclysm. Nobody's entirely certain what happened exactly, but the Scions went away. Their gear didn't. Their equipment was still left lying around. In some cases, the materia that had been bonded to their souls was still there, although it was severely damaged and warped. But the actual Scions, long gone. The only Scions who remained were, well, Gerlin, for some reason, his eternal splendor, who remains sequestered within Aburian somewhere, and of course, all of the Darra cost. Now, there are more things to be uncovered about the Scions, obviously. So much of the history of this world is tied into these people. But unfortunately, I've run out of things to tell you because the party has not uncovered it yet. I hope this has been fun to listen to. I'll see you next time.